Hi, welcome back. Excuse the audio. I seem to have misplaced all of my microphones. I'm going to hunt those down before the next video, promise. I wrote down all the ideas I have for some videos and I decided to go with this one for this official first one back from my hiatus or whatever you want to call it. So in case you couldn't tell by the title, we're going to be going over, or I'm going to be talking to you about every book that I read in 2025. And this is my venture into booktube, I guess. Like I did in my Let's Chat video, or the last video, I guess I should say. I'm going to have my Goodreads in the description if you would like to follow me over there or be friends over there. Yeah, so let's get into it, I guess. First thing, I started reading the Sonic the Hedgehog graphic novels or comics from the IDW publisher. These ones are written by Ian Flynn. Last year I read volumes 1 through 8, which I love the storyline that they were doing with those ones. Metal Virus storyline introduced a lot of really cool characters. I really enjoyed that Sonic was able to be a little snappy at everybody. And I like that they showed that Shadow isn't as indestructible as he thinks he is. Everybody was characterized amazingly, in my opinion, as a very big Sonic fan. Yeah. Next, also written by Ian Flynn, were the DC X Sonic crossover comics, which there are apparently more. There's a new arc coming out soon. I'm very excited for that. I love this crossover issues 1 through 5. Got to the point I was calling my nearest comic book store and they would hold on to a copy of the next issue for me when it released. Not wanting to spoil any of this crossover, but I love the story that they had going with it, and I can't wait to see what happens with the next one. Next is Faye, Volume 1 by Coda Wade. Little backstory for this. I am a very big fan of Coda Wade. Have been since I was in elementary school. She used to be on here under the name of... She used to be here on YouTube under the name Steam Fairy. And she's also a musician. She's in multiple different bands. Bad Wolf, Girl Radical, Future Moons. She also has a solo project going on. Or I guess not really a project. She's just a solo singer now. Used to be under her name Coda Wade, now is just under Coda, all caps, exclamation point. Love her so much, and when she announced that she was putting out a book, and I got very excited. It was better than I could have imagined coming from her, knowing how she writes her songs, how lyrical she is with them. The book was even better in my opinion. I definitely recommend it. And next I read the Communist Manifesto. I was just really curious about it, and Half Price Books near me had a copy of it, so I bought it and I read it, and it was very interesting to read. It was eye-opening in some ways. It made me think. Some of the stuff that was in it, definitely recommend reading it just to broaden your horizon, I guess. A way to say that. I'm not gonna say too much on it. Definitely just something to read if you're interested. Next, I read Lemony Snicket, The Unauthorized Autobiography by Lemony Snicket. And something to know about me is I am a very big fan of A Series of Unfortunate Events and everything that Lemony Snicket puts out. So I never actually read the companion books to A Series of Unfortunate Events until last year with The Unauthorized Autobiography. It was like every other book in the A Series of Unfortunate Events universe. It was funny. It was witty. I really enjoyed the puzzles and clues and riddles all throughout the story, all throughout the book. Lemony Snicket is honestly a master of his craft, if I do say so. I'm definitely going to end up rereading that, as well as the A Series of Unfortunate Events series. I'm trying to get my hands on a copy of the Beatrice Letters that is under $100. That is very hard to find, even on thrift books. Next, I read The Metamorphosis and Other Stories, which is a collection of stories, short stories written by Franz Kafka. Yeah, last year was definitely my Russian literature year. Don't know how that happened, but it did, and I honestly just bought that book purely to read The Metamorphosis because I was just very curious about it after realizing I'd never read it, even though apparently it's assigned reading at a lot of schools. It wasn't at any of mine, and the year and a half that I spent in college, it never got assigned to me, so I decided I didn't want to be left out, so read the whole book. And Kafka, some of his stuff is a little difficult to read. Not difficult to read, it's a little difficult to follow if you're not used to that way of writing. Luckily for me, I'm used to similar ways of writing to his, and it wasn't, not a lot of it was too hard for me to comprehend and understand. Metamorphosis was, like I said, main reason I wanted to read it, and I then found out he didn't want the beetle to be on the cover of the books, and luckily the copy that I got didn't have the beetle on the cover, but apparently people keep putting the beetle on the cover when it's solely just the Metamorphosis, and I'd like to know why they decided to disrespect his wishes like that. So there's that. All of his other stuff in that collection was very interesting to read. I really enjoyed it. Next is Scrappy Little Nobody by Anna Kendrick. It is her memoir. I'd started to read it, I think in 2024, and then I paused it and fell into a pretty hefty reading slump, but I picked it back up last year and finally finished it, and she is such a funny person. Even just talking about her own life, and she was able to keep her humor even with some of the darker thoughts that she was having, and I honestly just really enjoyed reading her memoir. And then I reread Pride and Prejudice because, I don't know, my side of the internet was having a resurgence in Austen era classics for some reason. I reread Pride and Prejudice, and it took me a little longer to get through it than the first time I read it. I started to burn out a little bit around the time I was reading Pride and Prejudice, but when I finally managed to finish it, it was just as good as the first time I read it. I don't really have much else to say about it. Then I read The Long Walk by Stephen King, published under his pseudonym Richard Bachman. I only read it because I watched the movie adaptation when it came out and hyperfixated on it very heavily. Stephen King's writing is brilliant as always. It did have his Kingisms in it, if you know what I mean, slurs and racism, but the boys in the book all felt very realistic, and I guess we can attribute that to King being a man as well, being of the male species as well. I thoroughly enjoyed the book. I flew through it. That may also be able to be attributed to me being fixated on it at the time, but I really did enjoy it. I'm compared to the movie, I will say I prefer the movie to the book, which is insane for me to say, but it is true. I preferred the movie mainly because of the stuff that they changed from the book to the movie. I can make a completely separate video about that if you guys would like, or you can just go over to my social media because I talked about it over there in a few posts. And then I read Horseradish by Lemony Snicket. It's just a collection of sayings and bitter truths, which I thoroughly enjoyed reading. One of the very first books I read this year includes some of those sayings from Horseradish as well. It was just a collection of bitter truths, wit, riddles, just the typical macabre and dark humor of Lemony Snicket. He's one of my favorite authors, so yeah. And then I actually DNF'd this next book, Full Moon by Jim Butcher. A little backstory on how I came upon this book. I attended a Twilight trivia night at the coffee shop that my younger sibling works at, and they had a blind date with a book thing going on where where you pick a book blindly just based on the character that they had on the front of it, and the Twilight character that they had wrapped over the cover of the book. You just check that out with the representative from the library that was there, and I picked Charlie Swan because I was nervous to pick any of the Alice ones. Anyway, Full Moon by Jim Butcher, which is the second book in whatever series it's part of. It had something to do with werewolves in it. I tried reading it, could not get into it. I may have to, if I decide to revisit it, I may have to start with the first book first. Yeah, but I DNF'd it because I could not, for the life of me, get through it, no matter how hard I tried. So I had to, unfortunately, DNF the book. And then the last book of 2025 that I read was Indigiqueerness by Joshua Whitehead. I'd never heard of Joshua Whitehead before buying and reading this book. My daughter has the zoomies. That was a fresh legal pad, and she just tore 2 pages off of it. Indigiqueerness is a conversation between Joshua Whitehead and an interviewer. They talk about Joshua's indigenous and queer identity. Joshua Whitehead is two-spirit, using he/him pronouns, if I remember correctly. In the interview that takes up the book, he and the interviewer talk about how he includes and conveys the indigenous and queer identities in his works, like Johnny Appleseed and all of his other works. I can't remember any of the titles off the top of my head at the moment. I am so sorry. But it's a very incredible and interesting read. I definitely recommend it. This is my daughter. Her name is Morticia, if you don't remember from some of my other videos. Yeah, those are all of the books that I read back in 2025. So that is 23 books that I read last year. I do plan on making another video very soon going over my first reads and first watches of January of 2026. So be on the lookout for that. I hope I didn't bore anybody talking about all these books. I will figure out a more interesting way to talk about these things. So I will see you guys in my next video. Comment if you feel moved to comment. Yep. Bye.